Welcome to another segment of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willies, your host. I am honored to have Dr. Emma Long, PhD, with us today. Who is Dr. Emma Long? She is a senior lecturer in American Studies at the University of East Anglia. For those who don't know, that is in the UK. She has interests in religion, law, and quite a bit more. But let me tell you what got my well, I'll tell her first. Welcome aboard, Dr. Long. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, absolutely. So let me tell you, one of the things that excited me about interviewing you is I watched a podcast of you earlier today, and you are somebody from outside of the United States who lived in the United States, who likes to study the United States. And I think we are we are a country now that is due a hell of a lot of study based on what's occurring out here. And I noticed that you're into both religion and you're into history. And I think there's a hell of a lot of intersectionality occurring in that regards in the United States right now.
Certainly, in the US, I mean, religion's been a major part of American history in lots of different ways and lots of different areas. But yes, it's certainly coming to the fore in recent years with President Trump making overt appeals to the religious community, and particularly in the context of the COVID-19 outbreak, there's some tensions there that are coming to the surface in the debates about how the governments of the states and the federal government should respond to it.
Now, I find it interesting that you started out with Donald Trump, and about Donald Trump seeking a support from the religious base, specifically the evangelical base in the United States. Don't you, as looking in, find that a bit ironic, knowing the history or his moral being, if you will?
I think to a lot of outsiders, it does seem very strange. And in fact, there's a divide in the evangelical community over the extent to which evangelicals should support Trump and his policies. So it's not necessarily straightforward connection. But yes, I think to a lot of people outside of the politics, particularly conservative politics in the United States, it does seem like a strange connection between people who speak about living a Christian life and following the demands of the requirements of the Bible, with a man who, to a lot of people, simply doesn't embody those qualities in any way, shape, or form. The response to that from many evangelicals is that everybody is a sinner and everybody has the opportunity to repent, get better, and so on. So those arguments have been around really since Trump was a candidate, before he was elected, and I think they're well rehearsed in discussion about Trump's religiosity or otherwise.
Now, doesn't you talk about everybody being a sinner? Doesn't being reaccepted or the like comes with something called atonement for what one has done? And then he once say he doesn't think he need to ask God for forgiveness for anything.
Yes, he did indeed, which makes that argument a rather difficult one to make. But there are people who are willing to hear that argument.
Now, I find that a lot of the evangelicals may be transactional here with our president, and that is that they may think that they are getting all that they need out of him. But I heard on a podcast that you did, where you brought in the word that the Tea Party has been using for some time, that many in these areas use, and that is freedom, and not only having to do with Christianity, but the I guess it's that interface between government and religion. Why don't you expand on that?
Sure. So there are a number of different debates here, but of course you've got religious liberty, the freedom of religion embedded in the US Constitution, and debates about what that means and how far that goes have obviously been a major part of American politics, certainly in the last half century, but have really come to the fore in the last 20 years or so, as conservative activists have really sought to use the judiciary and their legal language to build a case for the protection of the rights of largely Christians in the United States. And that narrative has fed into a debate about how far religious liberty is the primary requirement, or whether it's one of many requirements that sort of has to take its place amongst the other provisions of the Bill of Rights. And the debate has been about where that comes in relation to other things, when the right of religious liberty comes up against other rights. Now, the classic one in recent years, of course, has been the debate about LGBTQ rights, when religious groups argue that their faith simply cannot accept homosexuality, and the way in which people of faith who have those views can refuse service, thinking about a recent Supreme Court case, about whether they have to accept marriage equality. So it's been on the agenda for a very long time. And of course, it's a really fundamental issue, because it is putting people who really strongly hold to their beliefs in collision with each other.
Now, in your studies, when you do a comparison, let's say, of the United States in regards to these, many of them call them moral issues. I really call them ideological issues. Let's say whether it's gay marriage, or whether it is women ascension, or any one of those issues. How do you find that compares to what happens, let's say, in England or the other parts of the Western world? We don't really want to take into consideration others right now, because I see it another dynamic. How do you find that comparison, what's going on in America now compared to what's going on the other side of the pond?
Yeah. I mean, in many ways, there are some of the same debates here. We have an evangelical Christian population, although it's neither as large as it is in the United States, nor as influential. I think part of the fact that it's become such a major issue in the United States is actually, ironically, because of the Constitution, because these battles are presented in these sort of winner-takes-all terms for the meaning of the Constitution, the meaning of the First Amendment. It makes it much harder to find areas where there might possibly be compromise. Whereas in the UK, we don't have that. We do have a constitution, but it's largely unwritten, and it's made up of the laws that exist at any particular moment in time, which means it's not quite such a battle in the same way. So there is room for discussion and negotiation and compromise and finding middle ground. But the nature of American politics, as it's become increasingly polarized, and not just in the last 20 years, but in the last 40 years or so, means that it's become that kind of winner takes all, and reaching across the aisle and finding middle ground simply hasn't become possible. And so these debates ramp up and up and up. And that's entirely separate from the fact that obviously people on both sides feel very strongly separate from the political issue. So finding a middle ground may actually be difficult, even if the politics of it weren't there.
Now, you really think that the Constitution itself, the way our Constitution, or the Constitution of the United States, is written, is part responsible? I mean, or is it part responsible, or is it an excuse of a document that can be interpreted? And hell, we have a Supreme Court that says we are the ones who interpret the Constitution in however manner we want to. Which one is it?
Well, I mean, the Constitution is as written, so it's not the Constitution so much as it is the way that the Constitution has been used by people on both sides of the debate. And this has a long history, but particularly since the Warren Court of the 1950s, the Warren Court undertook this sort of massive so-called rights revolution, which expanded the rights of both civil rights and civil liberties for protected individuals against the role of the state and interpreted the Constitution in that way, you then sort of get a conservative backlash to that, which says that's not the way that it should go. And if you're going to use the Constitution to do it, we're going to find ways of using the Constitution to challenge that. And so the Constitution and the provisions of the Constitution and the cases that have come have been marshaled by both sides to fight each other. So it's not necessarily inherently in the Constitution, although I think you could probably have a very long debate about whether it is or isn't. But in terms of the issues that we're talking about here, it is the way that sides have used the Constitution, and the fact that that the Constitution becomes the go-to, the first
Yes.
point of go-to to try and find resolution rather than potentially trying to find it elsewhere. And that, of course, has only become even more so since with the polarization of American politics, with a Congress that can't agree and therefore doesn't get things done, or you can't find compromise in the political realm. Where else do you go? Well, in the US system, you go to the courts. So it's a combination of factors that has brought it in this form.
Now, you say that England has its own constitution that really, for all practical purposes, I don't know how you follow it. I listen to the House of Commons all of the times, and it's a ruckus. I enjoy it, actually. I think we should probably learn a few things from doing it that kind of a way, but you have a parliamentary system, we don't. But do you ever find that the adherence or the attempt to adhere to a document that is over 200 years, somehow should it have such an applicability with a society that is so different than the society that was there then? I mean, in fact, I have very little. I'm original from Central America, but having been naturalized an American citizen, even as such, I have very little use for the United States Constitution after studying it and realizing, hey, they were, for voting classification, they didn't mind considering me 3/5 of a man, or that, I don't find that these wise guys that were so great and that we adored, I have loyalties to the people that are doing good now. I don't know that I have much loyalty for the past. Tell me, why should I have loyalties otherwise?
I think that there may be something about being an outsider and not having been brought up with the Constitution as the thing that is there that you revere. And certainly I know when I talk to my students about the American Constitution, one of the things we sort of say is you have to stop putting it on a pedestal. It was written, it's a historical document. It was put together by people who were responding in the best way that they knew how to the situation in which they found themselves, in the context in which they were. It's all, we can hold them to contemporary standards, but they were people of their time, for good or for ill. The difficulty, I think, for me with your question is that I'm a historian by training, and so I spend a lot of time looking at why things have become where they are. So why people revere the Constitution in the way that they do, why it's become important, why the debates have come up around it. Which makes it kind of difficult for me to take a step back and say, should we just get rid of it? I don't know, that I'm kind of so embedded in trying to understand it as it is, that taking a position on whether the United States should simply get rid of it and start again is something that's rather hard for me to take. I mean, the reality is it's not going to happen. It is so embedded in American culture and American political life. And the reality is that given where American politics is right now, even if you tried to completely reshape government, I'm not sure you'd manage to do it. I think one of the real achievements, if you like, of the founders when they put this together was that despite everything that was going on, they did actually find areas on which they could compromise. Now, you can, there are problems there, but if you compare that to what might be possible now, it's an exercise I have my students do as well, is to write a constitution the way that they think it should be, and then talk about how realistic it would be to get that passed. And you suddenly realize how difficult that is.
I agree. I must agree. Now, let me jump to England or to the United Kingdom real quickly, just for a quick short question. Do you guys have any type of debates on the fundamental nature of the creation of your union? I know there's a whole lot of historicals between Ireland and England and Welsh, and I understand that, but do you all ever have those kinds of discussions that we have here?
It's been more of a debate in recent years, actually. If you're familiar with uh, the Brexit debate
Yes.
and Britain's misguided, should we say, decision
Hmm.
to leave the European Union back in 2016, and finally having started that process at the beginning of this year, because ultimately Scotland, part of the UK, but a
Hmm.
country in its own right historically and in many ways today, um, the majority of the population in Scotland voted to
Stay.
remain in
Yes.
the UK. And so there there have been debates sort of since 2016, and in fact, a couple of years before that, there was a referendum vote in Scotland about whether Scotland would be an independent country. So actually, in recent years, there has been more of a debate about the nature of the union, and inevitably, once you start having debates about the relation of Scotland to England, you then start having discussions about the relationship of Wales to England, and the question of Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland's relationship to the Republic of Ireland, and also to
Versus,
the
yeah,
UK. Of course, that has its own complicated history that
right.
was also fed into debates about Brexit. So, if you'd have asked me 10 years ago, I would have said that growing up here, there hadn't really been a debate about that, although I grew up in England.
Hmm.
So it's possible that there were more of those debates in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. But in the last few years, yeah, it's come to the surface a little bit more, but certainly not quite in the same way as we're used to seeing in the US, where it seems like almost every other political debate is about some kind of fundamental principle that relates to the Constitution and the nature of the Union. And we're seeing it again, actually, at the moment, the protests over state lockdowns,
Right.
uh, over COVID-19, and the question of what power and influence the president may or may not have to shape governors' responses to that is a reflection of that question in the US about the relationship between states and the federal government that goes right back to the founding.
Well, you brought that full circle to my last question, which has to do with the protests that we've been having here in the United States. Recently, they're very small, but as usual, the right wing has a way of commanding more TV audience than the left when they may get 10 or 15 people and they get the response that 100,000 people would get on the left. But anyhow, that's another subject. These people are really fighting about their freedoms to go out and work. So the last question is this: when does the freedom of others, in with respect to a disease like COVID-19, impacts on the freedom impact on the freedom of others, and how do we mitigate that? Because I think right now, a person deciding that they want to go out there irrespective with a disease, they also put my life in
Mm-hmm.
danger.
Yeah, and of course, everywhere is having these debates. We're having them in the UK, where we have a similar kind of lockdown, although the government doesn't like using that term. So yeah, there are real questions about that balance, and in some ways, it's a much bigger question. It's about questions of social responsibility and the responsibility that you as an individual have to the community in which you live. It's a question about the American economy and the nature of an economic system that is based so heavily on informal sort of informal contracts and 0 hours contracts and the gig economy, which means many people have been very badly hurt by the lockdowns and people's need to put food on the table, which of course is a genuine concern. A lack of a really strong social welfare program. Here in the UK, the government has instituted programs to try very hard to protect jobs, to keep people employed by subsidizing to a certain extent the
Wages.
company's salary base, so that hopefully once things begin to get back to normal, people will go back to work, and therefore we're not dealing with a higher level of unemployment. But the US has a very different system to that, and people are concerned. I mean, I personally feel safer right now staying at home. We have a lockdown. You see all these terrible stories about the loss of life, and you hear these really heartrending stories about people whose loved ones have passed away. They've not been able to go visit. They've passed away alone because of the restrictions on COVID-19. I think at the moment, all the science seems to suggest that we are better off staying at home and not spreading it. And the longer that we resist doing that, the longer this is going to go on. But aside slightly from the kind of the politics of liberty and what was it, President Trump tweeted, liberate these states, which is incendiary at best. Then that people have genuine concerns here about how they feed their families, and I think there are questions to be asked in the longer term about that side of things. There is that as part of this debate, as well as the political aspect of the debate, which is that we don't like big government. Federal government doesn't get to tell us what to do. We have the right to live our lives the way that we want, irrespective of anything else, which I think is a slightly different debate from some of the more pragmatic concerns that people have.
More than the science pragmatic. Well, look, Dr. Emma Long, it was my pleasure to have you here. Dr. Emma Long is a senior lecturer at the American Studies at the University of East Anglia. And folks, that's in the UK. Don't make the mistake I made before. Anyhow, thank you so kindly for having been here with Politics Done Right, Dr. Long. I'm Egberto Willies, host of Politics Done Right, an independent news program. I post several news videos of interest every day. I ask you so kindly to subscribe to my channel, and please leave me some comments. Thank you very much.